This is the Making Waves podcast, sponsored by Ripple Effect. My name is Dave Roetman, and we're here with Austin Goss, reporter from the Dakota Scout. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Dave, for having me.
Thank you. We're down here in Caribou Coffee.
Beautiful conference room right off the main room. I didn't know you could rent this room, but...
Well, technically, we didn't pay for it.
You can book this room.
You can book this room as long as you buy a latte.
Oh, there you go. Well, easy party.
So you're a political reporter in South Dakota. Could you kind of give us an overview of how political reporting works, so the history of political reporting in South Dakota?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's kind of unique about South Dakota political reporting, it's just basically just to start the geography of the state. I mean, you have Sioux Falls, of course, which is 3 hours from Pierre, about some change. And then you have, of course, Rapid City the other way. And then just in the middle of the state is Pierre. And there are certainly reporters there, which I would include myself and a couple others, only a few of which cover politics. But it's obviously very just difficult proximity to get to Pierre when there's press conferences or things like that. Just what I think it was about a week ago, the Attorney General had a press conference at the state capitol, and I was the only one in the row. So it's when things come up like that, and of course during session people come up for those things, but it is interesting compared to other state capitals across the country, where they're a little more metropolitans, and I'm thinking not even massive ones like Austin, Texas, or Madison, Wisconsin, but even states like South Carolina, Columbia is a very big suburb. Tallahassee, Florida, a very big city. Of course, Atlanta, Montgomery, Alabama. You look at these capitals, it's a little more ingratiated into the culture, is the politics, versus Pierre is so far geographically from where the populations of South Dakota are on the opposite sides of the state, that it sort of inclines itself to less maybe rigorous political coverage. You find that there's less people there nationally, there's going to be a little less coverage. And it's a smaller state. There's less population, and by extension, I think there's less things going on. And thankfully, we have a citizen legislature that's only there part-time, 3 months of the year, as everyone's familiar. And that's very different from states like Pennsylvania, Texas, Wisconsin, like we listed before, where they're a little more there full-time. They have staffs. And so, again, that inclines itself to have less going on. It's a unique state, I think, especially too with the one-party rule that we have with the Republican Party in the state. It makes it a little more quiet. You find that there's a little less news when there's one party and not so much an infighting dynamic. In fact, a lot of the coverage comes down, as you're well aware. We just had last week the Democratic recall of the chair. I mean, a lot of the sort of controversies of that nature come up interparty. It's a unique state. I think the small rural nature of it, and especially the very different East River, West River divide, and what kind of makes people tick on each side of the state makes it that much more interesting when you get to Pierre.
I can see that would be a challenge with less to report on. Why would you need a lot of political reporting?
Right. And again, like I said, you find that there are less things because it is such a small state. We have a citizen legislature. It's one-party rule, so there's not a lot of going back and forth and back and forth. I think, it's a naturally a good thing that our state government, our lawmakers want to come back here less often. You don't find that they return a lot. I was paying attention to the news in Texas the other day. Using that as a reference point because I covered the legislature there, but they've come back already for like 4 special sessions this year, and I mean some of them are like cut property taxes, things people would generally agree with no matter their political affiliation, and certainly in South Dakota, I like that idea. Yeah, I think people do like that idea, but it's like, man, that's a lot of special sessions to come back for, and we just don't have that sort of culture. I wouldn't use the word apathetic, but I think people are very content to be left alone and live where they live and not have to hear a lot about their state government unless they have to. And certainly, I think that's changed in more recent years with the national popularity of our governor. The sort of intense national interest in politics, I think, has trickled down to state politics in the post-Trump era, especially with Republicans. But I still think it holds true that it tends to be a little more quiet, and that certainly doesn't mean it does not necessitate coverage. It does, and I think we have a lot of really good reporters covering the state capitol, especially the Scout. But just to say,
that's an important point. As a conservative, I want to leave other people alone, and I want them to leave me alone. However, we're also aware that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Right.
And that's part of what we need to do is have good political reporting as part of vigilance.
And, I think in South Dakota, there's a sort of a mindset. We talked a little bit about this before the podcast of sort of general sort of independent streak of thought amongst Republicans and especially amongst conservatives. You feel that in small town. People want to be left alone. They don't want to hear about what's going on in Pierre. As long as it's not stepping on their toes, they don't show up. And you see that with a lot of bills that go through. They're very routine. There's not a lot of controversy in it. But when something does rub people the wrong way, I think of a couple of years ago, we had the, you might remember this, they had the Custer State Park campground bill. And they would build public campgrounds in Custer. I've never seen anything like that, even compared to 1080, the cross-section bill this year. People saw that bill. These normally apolitical campground owners, or people like Custer from out in that part of the state, saw that bill and were so frustrated that they showed up. And that's what it took. It was people showing up for something that they were concerned about, frustrated about. But other than that, people generally here like to be left alone. And I think that sort of trickles down into the way that the state operates politically, and also what that kind of directs the currents of news.
That is a very fair point, because conservatives need to show up if they want to continue to have a conservative state.
Right. You know, I mean, I think it's very easy to get apathetic in a very deeply red state. And I'm sure the same thing's true in states like California or otherwise that are very blue on the opposite side. But I think, the day belongs to the people who show up.
Right.
And it's easy to get apathetic, I presume, about the political makeup of South Dakota and think it'll never change. But it's really not that long ago. We had statewide elected Democrats. It was within our lifetimes. It wasn't that long ago, like I said.
That worked very hard to.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and that's the thing. Daschle was an institution in South Dakota, and still really is in a lot of ways. And certainly was an institution in Washington. And so, it was a lot of hard work. And I think you mentioned this beforehand, but since that Daschle race, things have sort of, the general interest in politics in South Dakota has declined, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I think people just like to be left alone. But certainly, it's not a guarantee that South Dakota would stay a red state forever. People change and places change and ideals change. And I think you see that across the country.
Again, vigilance.
Vigilance. Right. Yeah, it is.
You work for the Scout, the Dakota Scout.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. What does the Scout do?
So the Dakota Scout is sort of this alternative newspaper that Jonathan Ellis and Joe Zini started last September, shortly before the elections. And basically the goal is sort of just to provide a different voice, a different sort of news option for people, especially as you've seen across the state, not just with the Argus Leader, but with the Rapid City Journal as well, and in other major cities in South Dakota, just the decline of the traditional newspaper. I think they both believe that that's not so much to do with a lack of interest in news, and certainly not a lack of interest in what's going on in communities, and not just political, but just in communities. More so just the sort of outsourcing of the resources to make those papers go. And, the two major newspapers in the state right now are owned by out-of-state corporations who have moved a lot of those operations out of the state as well. And as a result, I think that the product reflects that. And you can feel that with other news outlets, not just the papers in the state. And I think what the Scout is doing is sort of locally sourcing a lot of those news options. I mean, everything that goes into the Scout happens in South Dakota, whether it's the printing or the reporting. There's no out-of-state coverage from the Scout, or no out-of-state work really done for the Scout. And that reflects in the product. You want people who live in your community and are a part of your community to cover your community, and you want that to be reflected in their business decisions. And I think that's what we're doing.
I mean, that's why I'm a subscriber.
That's right. Well, I appreciate it.
Where do you see political reporting in South Dakota going? What is the future, you think?
I think what we're going to see, and you've certainly seen this, I think with the advent of our paper, we're very, very fortunate to have the support that we do. And with the advent of outlets like the South Dakota Searchlight, which has also done a very good job in South Dakota, is it's going to continue to move towards a more independent option. I think, of course, these institutional papers and communities like Oneida and Highmore and Millbridge are going to continue to exist, but the sort of statewide shift is going to be towards more independent. It's going to come back to the communities. I think people are still craving the news. They still want to know, why is 41st Street have so much construction? They still want to know who's going to be the next mayor of my town. But the options that have typically gotten them that information are disappearing. And I think you're seeing this on the national level too, sort of a shift from, our reliance on traditional news media to outlets that operate out of Substack, or reporters who used to be at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post are now moving to independent outlets or doing their own thing or starting their own podcast. A good example, I think, is Megyn Kelly. Look at Megyn Kelly. She was was up at prime time, number one host on Fox News, and now she has incredibly successful podcast that she started on her own and does her own thing. as popular as before, if not more. She has a lot more leeway to say whatever she wants. And I think the same thing is happening in South Dakota. You're seeing a sort of a shift towards more privately owned, more independently driven news outlets. And I think it's good.
That's why most of the people I read are on Substack.
Right. Same. I mean, it's I think that when you're not answering, and this is true if you own a franchise for a restaurant, or if you own any sort of franchise, if you work for anyone, the more people you have to answer to, sort of the less independence you have over your product. And I think you feel that in news reporting.
This seems like a positive development for political reporting. I'd rather have more independent voices where I can know the person who's doing the reporting rather than having staff reporting or having a groupthink situation in a major newspaper outlet.
Right. And like I said, I mean, I do think South Dakota is very independent, generally sometimes can be a little more politically apathetic at times, but there is still a craving for legitimate news reporting, legitimate stories coming out of here, or Sioux Falls, or Rapid City, or Watertown, and Aberdeen. And a lot of these communities don't have that anymore. And so I think the shift is coming back, and I think it's an exciting development for South Dakota.
Well, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, David.